Hello, everyone. My name is Katya Sagienko, and I'm an astrologer. Come on, admit it. Who's already read a bunch of scary stories about the Eclipse Corridor? This topic is really taking off, isn't it? And I just wouldn't be myself if I didn't make a video about it, of course. Today we're going to talk about the Eclipse Corridor, which will take place soon from September 7th to September 21st. So let's discuss what this is. What is this scary sounding phrase anyway? Why do all astrologers sound so fatalistic, saying that any decisions made during the eclipse are impossible to reverse, irreversible, and can't be changed? Everything you do during this period is supposed to be super karmic or something. And we'll break down what this whole thing actually is and what the difference is between a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse and how they really affect us. And most importantly, what to do and how to get through this calmly, and above all, consciously. Let's start with some history, as I like to do. Why were eclipses so frightening in the past anyway? In ancient times, eclipses weren't seen as such terrifying events. That is, the sun and the moon would go dark, right? So this was perceived as some kind of end of the world, as a punishment from the gods. So people believed that during this period, back then people weren't as aware as we are now, in the sense of understanding and explaining all natural phenomena with planets and so on. People could only observe the phenomenon itself. So they lived their lives, and then suddenly the sun is eclipsed or the moon suddenly goes dark. So what's happening? And people thought that these were periods when either the king would die, or the country would perish, or wars, epidemics, or pandemics would begin. So it was perceived as a harbinger of something bad, something dark. And in different cultures, there was this idea of hunting dragons. They would call for the sun, make noise on purpose to bring back the light. And it became a kind of collective drama. So when such an eclipse happened, people would immediately start to worry. Yes, so for them it was perceived as a harbinger of something bad, something that, so to speak, knocked them out of their usual familiar routine. For example, in China, they would beat drums to drive away the dragon. Yes, they believed that supposedly this dragon was devouring the celestial body, and it's no coincidence that it's about a dragon, right? Because eclipses actually occur along the axis of the cosmic nodes. Yes, the karmic nodes are actually the tail, the dragon's tail and head, that is Rahu and Ketu. And that's why it was believed, yes, in China, this all came from Chinese tradition, that China, oh Lord, not China, the dragon devours the sun, yes, devours the celestial body or the moon, and something had to be done about it. Something had to be done, right? To create some kind of noise, to make some kind of sound, right? To somehow awaken nature, right? To bring it back. So it's kind of like how people go out to the maidens now, right? A protest, a protest. This was the same in India. People would hide because they believed that during an eclipse, some kind of evil was happening. Yes, so they thought that now everything is being eclipsed and they urgently needed to run somewhere. Because if you stay under this light, or rather under the absence of light, it would somehow have a very frightening effect on your fate. The Maya had sacrifices, right, in order to save this light. So they would offer something as a sacrifice and believe that in return they would get the light back. And it really did come back, right? So it became a kind of tradition. And even now, this fear remains in our psyche. It doesn't go anywhere. So we are born with these generational stories that go all the way back to primitive humans, right? Everything that people experienced before the dawn of our civilization, it's all embedded in our genes. It's all in our blood. That's why if it used to cause fear before, naturally it still causes fear in us now. Now we've just gotten smarter. Everyone is like that, but the archetype has remained. So something dark is coming, right? And now let's add the internet, astrobloggers, and we get a new scary story, the Eclipse Corridor. And by the way, in ancient times, no one ever said corridor. So this concept of a corridor is an invention of recent years. Like it's some kind of corridor, something long that will influence things for a whole month, right? There was no such thing before. It's only now that people have made up this idea of a corridor. And so when it comes, it turns into a period that everyone is supposed to be afraid of. But in reality, it's just two eclipses happening one after the other. First comes the lunar eclipse, then the solar one. That's all. But for dramatic effect, they call it a corridor. Basically, this whole story creates the feeling that you want to freeze, right? Freeze in fear, not go anywhere, and immediately start looking for some hints. What interesting things are going to happen? What am I not allowed to do? Astrologers love to write and say, and I think you've already watched a lot of videos on this topic, that you shouldn't do anything, absolutely nothing. Fate is being decided. Any decision you make is irreversible. If you do something now during the eclipse corridor, it will last for your whole life. A friend of mine wrote to me recently and said, I remember that when the last eclipse corridor happened, well, not the last one, but 9 years ago, she calculated and looked back at what she did during that. I can't remember if it was a solar or lunar eclipse, but that's not the point. It's just that she during that time, signed a lease for an apartment, so she rented a place, and now she says to me, so does that mean it's such a fateful event that I'll end up living in this apartment forever? Well, she still lives there to this day. But that's not because it's some kind of karmic event. She can move out at any time, you see? But because the mind starts spinning and all these stories come up like it's something irreversible, it puts this scary thought in your head, this silly idea, right, that you'll end up alone in this apartment, you'll never have a husband, you'll die alone. Can you imagine that? Well, that's just about the apartment. That's just, well, it's not even that fatal of a thing yet. But if you take, for example, I don't know, getting married during the eclipse corridor, isn't that, well, I don't even know what could be so fatal about it, like something so irreversible, right, that it's all just completely final. Thank God it's irreversible. No need to get divorced, everything's fine. Or if you did get divorced, then you'll never get back together. Oh my God. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't, right? I don't know what events in our lives could be truly irreversible, things that just can't be changed. But seriously, this is just such nonsense. Honestly, all this talk and discussion about karma really truly makes me laugh out loud, because I've even done a lot of Instagram lives and live sessions on this very important topic. The entire concept of karma is, well, it's a story that's way too dramatized and often misunderstood, right? Because karma isn't actually about punishments or retribution. It's fundamentally about cause and effect, a natural consequence of actions. In other words, karma is created every day. Karma is created by your actions, your thoughts, and your decisions, the ones you make right now. So our tomorrow is basically the result of the choices we've made before, right? Or what we have now. That's also karma, in fact, isn't it? So everything is karmic. Absolutely everything you see around us, everything we create, it's all karmic. There is bad karma and good karma, depending on your decisions, depending on how you think, how you reason. So, yes, it kind of happens along the axis of the nodes, supposedly, yes, that there are, of course, fateful things we can't influence. And in astrology, indeed, the karmic nodes are the only points we cannot influence. Well, look, for example, when some planet is transiting, right, you can, let's say, understand its energy, yes, what it wants. That is, you can, so to speak, connect the energy of the planet with a sphere of life, see what it influences, look at the events that are unfolding, and possibly steer things somehow. If the situation isn't going the way you want, yes, you can turn the story in your favor or accept the experience that's happening, right? Well, kind of look at this situation and understand what's actually going on when it comes, that is, well, regarding the influence of the planets. I mean that we can consider some kind of variability, yes, in events. That is, we can look at it that way. And when the nodes pass through certain points, this is called karmic events. Well, karmic events in the sense that, for example, we can't influence things like a war starting or someone dying, or when you go through a certain period in your life, there are these points that simply have to happen. Whether you want it or not, you have to have a child at a certain moment, right? You have to move to another country at a certain point. You have to be fired from a certain job at a certain time. Because if you can't consciously make that choice yourself, then when the knot reaches a certain point, it kind of turns, yes, it turns in the direction you need to go. This is what is called karmic. That is, these are the events that, let's say, we can't influence. But when an eclipse happens, an eclipse is not, well, it's not the kind of karmic events we might imagine, something terrible, right? It's just, well, it's like an increase in the number of events, an increased level of events. But that doesn't mean you no longer have any influence. If you did something during this eclipse, it doesn't mean you no longer have any control over your life. And if you made some decision or went somewhere or started seeing someone, it doesn't mean that everything is a disaster and terrible, right? Why are we always afraid of something anyway? Why don't we ever think that karma could actually work in our favor, right? For some reason, people just don't think about this, unfortunately. In short, what I'm saying is that there's no fatalism, guys. There can't be any fatalism during the eclipse corridor. It's all just patterns and regularities. That is, all karmic stories that happen, as I said, are all just regularities. So if something happens in your life, it's still the result of our choices. Whether that choice was right or wrong, what difference does it make, right? A bad event, a good event, it doesn't matter. It's the result of our choices in the past. We didn't know what would happen next. That's how we learn from our mistakes, right? So in order to understand what's right or what we need, we have to go through some pitfalls. That's what is called karma. So you step on some rake and you kind of decide, are you actually okay with being in this situation with the rake, right? Do you like the result you get from these pitfalls or not? If you don't like it, you start reacting differently and changing, right? You change your decisions, your thoughts, and essentially your actions. And so it turns out that all of this is a pattern. So an eclipse accelerates what was already inside us, right? It doesn't bring anything that wasn't already there. And if, for example, your relationship has been falling apart at the seams for 6 months, it might break completely. An eclipse, yes, is like a catalyst, like a point where the situation intensifies. If you've wanted to change jobs for a long time but couldn't make up your mind, then such an opportunity will come, right? Is that a bad thing or a good thing? It's always a good thing. Even if we think that some events in our lives are bad, that's just a reaction. It's our reaction. There are no bad or good events. All events are neutral. We decide ourselves how to react to these events, you see? That's it. And why is there so much hype about all of this right now? Well, because things like don't make any decisions, don't do anything, freeze, just sit there, that all sounds very kind of scary, right? All these words saying it's fatal, that everything is predetermined, they get views, you know? That's how people promote themselves. But I want you to understand that an eclipse is not some kind of fatal event, right? It's simply an intensification of processes that are already underway, that have long been happening in your psyche, happening in events. It's just that during eclipses, there are these kinds of flashes, surges, a heightened, a higher degree, like an accumulation of energy that leads to some event. That's it. An eclipse simply speeds things up, it just accelerates and brings about a result, right? Everything that was postponed starts to happen. Everything that was ignored begins to surface. Everything you need to finish or renew, yes, it happens, right? And so it's not fate coming to ruin your life. It's just life kind of hinting to you, wake up already, wake up, enough sleeping, right? You're heading in the wrong direction. For example, if something unpleasant is happening, what's the difference between a lunar and a solar eclipse? The lunar eclipse, which will take place on September 7th in the sign of Pisces, is like a finale. It's like an intensification of emotions. That is, everything you've been hiding or suppressing will come to the surface. It could be a quarrel because of old grievances. It could be the realization that it's time to leave your job because you've burned out there, for example. It could be the end of a relationship that's been falling apart for a long time. So a lunar eclipse cleanses, it clears out, takes away, brings things up, intensifies them so that you can understand something about yourself, right? You realize something. It's an aggravation of some situation, maybe even an unpleasant one. It's unpleasant, isn't it? The moon is responsible for emotions. So this is a very emotional period, right? This is exactly what needs to be stirred up in order for some new impulse to emerge. The solar eclipse, which will take place on September 21st in the sign of Virgo, is already a new beginning, a new program, something that will be renewed, an influx of energy. A solar eclipse is always a new point, a fresh start. But for something to be renewed, for the system to be updated, it needs to be rebooted. Sometimes this happens through a crisis. No one says that a new beginning is always cute, great, and easy. A new start often comes through the collapse of something, through some troubles, through certain crises, through problems and stresses, right? But this is a reset point so that you can start differently, right? So wherever a solar eclipse occurs, that's where you have a chance and significant event. In other words, events will unfold in such a way that you will have to start something new there. During a lunar eclipse, something falls away. Wherever the lunar eclipse happens, something is removed, cleaned out, taken away, right? Fears, emotions, and so on may surface. During a solar eclipse, we have the opportunity to set a great new impulse there for the whole year. Do you understand? That's why you need to know exactly where and what is happening for you. And an eclipse is not some kind of mystical punishment. It's a moment when logic is eclipsed, when logic shuts off. During an eclipse, logic always shuts down and the unconscious comes to the surface. Eclipse of consciousness. Especially during a solar eclipse, that is, the moon as the unconscious creeps onto the sun, onto consciousness, and an eclipse of consciousness occurs, an eclipse of the brain, I would say. Now, those who are being intimidated, yes, are also experiencing a brain eclipse. In other words, rationality fades away, it leaves, and it should leave because the unconscious rises up. Unconscious fears surface, things we've suppressed for a long time, things that were unpleasant to us. And if you live on autopilot, yes, these kinds of reactions that you aren't aware of. So what does it mean to live on autopilot? Well, when you do something, right, and you don't understand why you felt a certain emotion, why someone behaved a certain way toward you, right? Why is this person mocking you? Why is that one provoking you? In other words, you don't understand, right, why this is happening. So in this case, yes, when a person lives on autopilot, so to speak, in their life and doesn't think about whether they're doing something for themselves or about the cause and effect relationships behind all these events in their life, well, surprises can happen. Things that have long been holding you back from moving forward might suddenly come up. So in fact, during such periods, it's as if we stop, during an eclipse, we really do stop controlling everything. We actually see what was usually hidden, what was concealed, some of our fears, some of our secret desires, some unresolved conflicts. In other words, the things you kept silent about, right? That's why these standard pieces of advice, don't make any decisions, don't do anything, don't take any action, well, that's complete nonsense. On the contrary, you need to make decisions. If something comes up, you need to deal with it. In order to break out of this vicious cycle, if something from the unconscious comes up, if a fear arises, if something unpleasant happens, you shouldn't just sit back and do nothing, because then it will just stay as it is. Look, a solar eclipse demands a new beginning, a new impulse from you, but you're doing nothing. So what then? Or if during the lunar eclipse some frightening, well, like some scary emotions come up, I mean, yes, in this context, suddenly anxiety rises, right? Suddenly some conflicts surface, right? So something like that starts happening, as if something unpleasant is going on. And you're like, no, I was told not to make any decisions, so I'll just sit here and do nothing. Well, it doesn't work like that, guys. If we do that, we'll just sit on our butts, and that's exactly how things will keep happening. But we want to change something in our lives, right? It's just important not to make decisions based on emotions, but rather, let's say, to look at the situation a little bit from the outside. And after all the storms have passed, you simply make your decision. But during the eclipse itself, you don't have to make any decisions at all. You just need to observe what comes up in which area and why, right? All of this is very important. Here's another example. An eclipse is like a system update. So this so-called corridor, as it were, is like a system update. Something gets cleared out so that something new can begin afterward. Imagine your computer freezes, right? What do? You restart it, but you don't know if it will turn back on or not, right? What's going to happen now? But there's no other way. It's frozen. You need to interact with it somehow, right? It's the same here, right? So you need to reboot this system, not knowing what it might lead to, right? For example, a solar eclipse happens in the 7th house, which is about relationships, and suddenly you have some kind of argument flare up with your partner. You argue, right? Because there was some problem you had been ignoring for a long time, and then suddenly this argument happens and you don't understand what's going on, but it's precisely this conflict, yes, this very conflict, that triggers some new honest conversation, which can either save the relationship or free you for something new, something better. Do you understand? That's why specifically during eclipses, because these are very emotional moments, it's during eclipses that this kind of outburst happens, an outburst of something that's been bothering you for a long time, something that needed to go. Even if some unpleasant events occur, the way you react to them, that's yours, that's your choice, you see? It's important not to panic. It's important to give time, to give the situation some time, to trust life, for heaven's sake. Yes, a lot of people are afraid that something will be lost, that some stability will go away, that a job will be lost, or that someone will leave. But if it goes, let it go, just let it go. And really, this doesn't just apply to eclipses, it applies to our whole life. For heaven's sake. Well, look, we don't just break up during eclipses, right? We don't just change jobs during eclipses either. It's just that all this fear is pinned specifically to this period, as if something terrible, something absolutely unbelievable is going to happen exactly during the eclipse, some kind of event that will, oh, for goodness sake. In reality, many people don't even feel these eclipses. And honestly, they're lucky people, truly. Now, let's talk about the essence of this corridor. It will take place along the Virgo-Pisces axis, right? The signs Virgo and Pisces. So Virgo is the sign of order, analysis, rationality, right? And Pisces, accordingly, is the opposite sign. It's also a kind of energy, right? It's about chaos, intuition, and feeling, right? So if in Virgo everything is rational, then in Pisces it's always about emotions and letting go of control, right? So as I said, in Virgo we control everything, we rationalize everything, but in Pisces it's about trust, trusting life, right? Venus in Pisces often gives this kind of feeling on the secret card as well. There will be money. There will always be money. Money falls from the sky. That's awesome. So the corridor, it will test this. Yes, the eclipse corridor. It will check where we've gotten too stuck in perfectionism. Yes, maybe. Where you're already, getting worked up, where the system is already going off the charts, right? It will break down. What you've been building there, yes, and now it's getting in your way. And so it might break down. And where you might possibly be living in some illusions where you, well, don't trust your intuition, don't trust your feelings. You trust those same hints that come to you. Let's put it that way. This will also be revealed. This is about exposing deception, supposedly, right? Some stories might start to surface that seem strange, but it's all simply because you haven't noticed something, right? So, well, you just have to accept it here. And topics may come up where you need to bring order, let's say, where there's chaos happening for you, right? And where, on the contrary, you need to let go of the situation, relax, trust, accept everything as it is, and not worry at all, really not worry, especially if something just isn't working out for you, but you're forcing yourself into it, right? Like you feel you have to do it urgently, but it's just not happening, right? And in such moments, we let go. There's another important detail here because these eclipses are divided into active eclipses and passive eclipses. Not many people talk about this, but I will. An active eclipse is when it falls on a personal planet, on your personal planet or on some important cusp. Well, actually, on any cusp in principle. That is, a cusp is the beginning of a house. Yes, our natal chart is divided into sectors. If an eclipse lands right on the cusp of a house, right on that little line, yes, it creates events. Or when it touches a planet right within an orb that is a distance of 5 degrees, yes, when it sits on a planet, that's when there can really be some emotional explosions, some events, some twists and turns. This is important. This is important. It will really affect you. Passive is when the eclipse simply passes through a house. It just simply moves through the house. It doesn't touch anything. It doesn't cast any aspects. It just passes through the house. Then it can just pass by as background, right? You might feel like something is happening to someone else. Someone else's life is falling apart somewhere. Something's going on. But what I mean is this state, yes, this state, the tension, the intensity of emotions, passions, anxiety, maybe at most you'll feel some kind of premonition, some kind of feeling that something is bothering you, or maybe some thoughts about changes. It wouldn't be bad if something like that came up. Yes, that might surface, but it's not well, I mean, it's not necessary for some actual event to happen, right? For some people, this might just be in the background. And in order for you to understand how strongly the eclipse will affect you, you need to see whether it has touched these important points, whether it has landed on the cusp of a house or on your planet. That's when it will be felt super strongly. So be sure to check which house around the 15th degree of Pisces falls in your chart. That's where the lunar eclipse will take place. And the solar eclipse will be at the 28th degree of Virgo, right? So those are the points that will be visible. For beginners, for people who aren't deeply immersed in astrology, of course, this can be difficult naturally. So if you want to better understand what's happening in your chart, how all of this affects you, whether it impacts you or not, what events might occur, then come either to study, yes, you can learn this, or to a consultation with me, because these are very personal questions. And to be honest, yes, many people make forecasts based on ascendants, like if you are, or even make these forecasts for zodiac signs. But honestly, that's just not how it works at all, because here it's really important to pay close attention to the degrees, you see? So if I start telling you a forecast for a Virgo ascendant and say that the eclipse is happening in some particular house, it might not even land there at all, you understand? So there's really no point in looking at it that way. You need to check this yourself. Yes, see for yourself where those degrees I just mentioned are located in your chart. Or you can write your birth details in the comments and I'll take a look and let you know where exactly the eclipse is happening for you. One more small nuance, yes, about how to actually check which is a lunar and which is a solar eclipse. So on September 7th, we look at where the moon is located. That's the house where the lunar eclipse will take place. And on September 21st, we look at where the sun is, right? That's where the solar eclipse will occur. Again, if it's difficult, write in the comments and we'll go over it. In the meantime, I'll go through the houses just to give you a bit of an idea. I'll tell you a little, not too much, but roughly what might happen if you have a lunar or solar eclipse there. So we remember that a lunar eclipse brings up fears, it brings up doubts, it clears out emotions, and it raises unnecessary dead things that are already blocking your growth, right? It's a very emotional period when illusions are revealed and something comes to an end. A solar eclipse is a system reboot, it's energy for something new, but it comes through effort, right? But it's a very powerful point of potential that you can, I'd even say must, realize. If the eclipse falls in the first house, for example, the lunar one, that's the area responsible for personality, image, and health. There too, it can be affected indirectly, meaning the body. If it's a lunar eclipse, then it's a feeling of being tired of how you present yourself to others, for example. Maybe you're tired of playing a certain role. Maybe you want to shed other people's expectations. There might be thoughts like, yeah, that's it, I don't want to pretend to be strong or different or the way I always pretend to be. So health issues might also become more acute. You need to pay attention to what is becoming more pronounced, what is coming up, and what you should focus on. If this solar eclipse is in the first house, then it can and should be a new image, something to refresh in yourself, to update your style. Maybe it's a new decision regarding your lifestyle, right? to change your habits or look different, to become someone else, to take on a new role. So take a closer look at how you used to behave before, and do things differently, right? And that is, a solar eclipse gives you the opportunity to start expressing yourself in a new way. The second house is about money, values, and resources, right? So if it's a lunar eclipse, some old fears might resurface. Yes, any fears related to money. Like, what if I don't have enough? Or maybe you suddenly need money for something. You might get some news about a debt or an inheritance. This concerns the second and eighth house axis, right? So everything related to money, some old financial issue comes up, some kind of anxiety. If it's a solar eclipse, then it's a desire to restructure your income system. Maybe you'll start to rethink what you're actually being paid for, right? Maybe I want to raise my prices, for example, right? I want to earn money differently, not the way I used to. So your task for the solar eclipse is to lay the foundation for this new system. The third house is about communication, learning, your close social circle, right, brothers and sisters? So if there's a lunar eclipse in the third house, it could mean the return of an old contact or some kind of emotional connection with a brother or sister, for example, right? Some kind of conflict with relatives there. Why am I solving problems for my relatives, maybe even distant ones? So things like that can happen. Maybe you'll feel like cleaning out your computer, right? Or maybe some piece of technology will break, something you no longer need. So things like that might happen. If it's a solar one, then you might have an insight or a desire to learn something new, right? Maybe you'll want to enroll somewhere, maybe travel somewhere, maybe change your social circle, present yourself differently, or perhaps there will be some new developments with documents, right? Maybe you'll buy yourself a new car. The fourth house is the house, yes, house in the literal sense of the word. Real estate, family, the place where I live, right? So if a lunar eclipse passes through the fourth house, there might be a resurfacing of old family issues, right? Some tears, some memories, maybe some renewed resentment towards your parents, right? So, for example, an old issue with real estate might come up, right? If it's a solar eclipse, then it could be a decision about renovations. Yes, it's a good time to start such things. Maybe a move, possibly a change in your everyday habits. I don't know. Maybe completely changing your furniture, rearranging things, or tidying up so that everything is just the way you want it. The fifth house is about children, right? Children, businesses, projects, things that you create yourself, yes? That is including through your hobbies, maybe some purchases as well. So if the lunar transit passes through the fifth house, it could mean realizing, for example, that you, well, I don't know, no longer want to earn money from your hobby, or maybe some system in the way you ran your business gets cleared out, for instance. Or perhaps some emotional ups and downs and questions about raising a child come up, like all these emotions surface, such as, I'm tired of carrying all this on my own, or a realization that something isn't right in your parenting with your children. So it could be these kinds of emotional swings. A solar eclipse is the emergence of some new interest. Yes, maybe you develop a crush on someone, right? Or some new idea for creativity, a desire to raise your child differently, right? The new approach, yes, a new approach to business, like a new kind of service. Yes, it's great to implement something like that during a solar eclipse. The sixth house is about work, routine, schedule, health, right? So if a lunar eclipse passes through the sixth house, it can be, an emotional outburst from overload, fatigue from routine, like I just can't take it anymore, right? It could even be some kind of illness, right? So that you realize that maybe you're taking on too much at work, or maybe you're just completely fed up and tired of this job, right? These could be some chronic issues that come to the surface, things you need to pay attention to, things you've been ignoring, right? So things like that might make themselves known. A solar eclipse is about making decisions and really having the opportunity to establish a new habit, a new routine, to change your diet, to change your approach to work, to completely change your approach to self-care, caring for yourself and your health, and to build a system, a kind of new system. Yes, if everything was chaotic for you before, now is a great time to build a system. The seventh house is about partnership, relationships, clients, and yes, certain contracts. So if the lunar eclipse is happening in our seventh house, it could mean um, the end of certain illusions, right? Like you thought he would change, but he won't, right? Some old grievances may resurface towards people, friends, or your partner in a relationship so that you can work through them. A breakup is possible, especially if the relationship is completely toxic. If it's a solar eclipse, it could be a decision to change the model of your relationship, to set some new rules, or, for example, to go to therapy with your partner, right? These could be new clients or they could be new relationships. It's about, well, new realizations about how you want things to be in your relationships and the real possibility to actually change that. The eighth house also covers everything related to money, like loans, resources, especially other people's resources, and it can also be about intimacy, right? So if a lunar eclipse passes through the 8th house, it could mean the closure of some old financial issues because they come to the surface, right? It's about emotionality when it comes to money, when something comes up, some debt, for example, when you need to revisit all these topics. It could also be related to inheritance or discussions about money with your partner, right? There could be issues like dividing the family budget, or some subconscious fears about money and earnings might surface, and even jealousy could arise in the partnership, right? So, something along those lines. A solar eclipse, on the other hand, could mean a new financial strategy, right? New sources of income, for example, taking out a loan or a mortgage, or setting aside a large sum for something significant, right? A reevaluation of your intimate relationship with your partner as well. So these kinds of topics might come up. The 9th house is everything related to moving, documents, and authoritative figures in your life, right? It also has to do with education, right? So it's actually about your worldview, by the way. When a lunar eclipse passes through the 9th house, it's often a shift in your reference points, a realization that, well, the values you held, what you used to believe in, is somehow just not right anymore. Maybe the people you trusted aren't who you thought they were, right? And maybe those authorities you considered to be authorities, well, you start to see the situation differently, right? Maybe again some old issues with documents will come up, or perhaps something related to past education, right? Maybe you'll have to reconsider your relationship with your mentor and so on. That is anything related to the past, unresolved issues in these areas, right? Maybe you'll need to go somewhere, right? Or maybe return home. So things like that might come up. A solar eclipse is about making a decision, for example, to learn something new, right? So it's a change in your outlook on life. It's like new principles, a new belief in something, right? It could mean planning an important trip, or actually going on a trip, studying, right? When you, maybe if you want to be in the spotlight to teach someone, this is also a great time to start. So during solar eclipses, you always receive energy to put your knowledge into practice, right? Or to go somewhere, or even move if you've wanted to for a long time. The 10th house is about career and status, right? And it can also relate to relationships with your boss, with the law, with authority. So if a lunar eclipse passes through the 10th house, it can always bring up things like being tired of your job, or some conflicts at work, right? Something just isn't going the way you want, right? Maybe you're tired of your responsibilities or the way you're being treated, right? It could be a breakup with your boss or with some colleagues and something like that. A solar eclipse is about new goals, new horizons, some kind of shift in your career, maybe even a promotion, right? So you can direct your energy there, ask for a promotion, and you'll get it. That is self promotion, building new systems, systems of advancement. If, for example, you work for yourself, then a new structure for how you see your own career progression. The 11th house is about groups. Yes, everything related to society, everything that concerns large gatherings of people, right? Let's remember, this isn't about friends here. Friends are in the 7th house. And this is about plans. The 11th house is about plans, it's about the future. So when the lunar eclipse passes through the 11th house, it's always about, the collapse of plans. If those plans, well, if they're not really your plans, for example, but someone else's plans, that is some imposed patterns of thinking or things you were supposed to do, but in reality, you didn't actually want to do them. So it can come out like that. It could be about truly cutting yourself off from genuinely toxic people. When you consciously decide to leave a truly toxic company, a deeply toxic group, or you even fully realize that, well, you unfortunately wasted your valuable time on some particular project that ultimately didn't bring you any significant results, right? If it's solar, then it's the opposite. It's new connections, new projects, a more sensible approach to communication when you understand what kind of environment you want, and you find, for example, an environment that gives you growth. The 12th house is everything related to the subconscious. It's our inner world, and it also includes foreign countries. So if the lunar passes through the 12th house, some fears may always come to the surface. This is a very emotional area because it directly concerns the unconscious. So everything you've been suppressing inside yourself will come out. Some secret stories, perhaps some old habits that are holding you back. Maybe some old reactions, maybe some old resentments, some secrets that someone tried to hide from you, and you'll realize what problems you've actually been running from. Yes, what's really going on? If it's a solar eclipse, it could be a conscious decision to change your life, to restart your life. For example, to leave this country altogether and go somewhere else, or to return, say, to your homeland. So it could be a change in lifestyle in terms of your mindset. Like you might start doing yoga and some kinds of meditation. It could be a trip out into nature that gives you a new perspective on life, right? Your sleep schedule, for example, might improve. So you might even realize that something that used to surround you doesn't give you any energy at all, and you need time to be in silence and really understand what you want. So an eclipse isn't something scary, it's like a phase of the moon. It's the same with an eclipse, it's just that it happens on the karmic nodes. It's just like a new moon, just like a full moon. A full moon is always a peak. A new moon is always about something new. That's why a solar eclipse is always about something new. And a lunar eclipse is always about some kind of emotional surge. And we just need to understand that it can be like this, depending on where it happens. If we're talking about general recommendations, I'll just tell you, don't be afraid. Yes, don't be afraid. Use any moment that comes up for analysis, not for panic, but for conscious decisions, for understanding how you actually react to all these situations. Ask yourself what you need to let go of in order for something new to come into your life, right? Maybe you're already dragging something along behind you. This is already acting as unnecessary ballast holding you back. The most important thing is not to make decisions in a state of hysteria. In general, don't make decisions. Don't make decisions when you're panicking or hysterical. Don't freeze up. Yes, don't freeze up. Just observe and watch. And if the situation is really heating up, don't wait for the end of the eclipses. Just act and trust life. Trust the process of life. If something falls away, it means it was meant to fall away. And remember, there is no fatality, there is no fatality. We create our own karma. Every day we can change our thoughts and decisions, and by doing so, create our new karma. I will be very happy if this video was helpful for you, and I would be grateful if you subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for your attention. See you in the next videos.